Welcome to this 4-part Blender tutorial series where I'm going to show you how to create this birdhouse nature animation. So throughout this tutorial series, I'll be showing you the complete process of creating this entire scene here. So in this part, in part 1, we're going to be modeling some little sticks and some little dry pieces of grass. We'll be adding materials to those objects, and then we'll be using geometry nodes to place them around in a circle to create the bird nest. Then in part 2, we're going to be modeling the branches and the leaves, and then we're going to be animating the leaves moving around in the wind. Then in part 3, we're going to be creating the larger branches and placing those around the scene, and then we'll put the nest on the larger branches and then placing the leaves around the scene. And then in part 4, in the final part, we're going to be adding the eggs into the bird nest. We're also going to be adding a few feathers into the nest, and then we'll also animate the camera and we'll render the scene and do the video editing. So the entire tutorial series is going to be completely free on my YouTube channel. And if you enjoy my tutorials and you'd like to help support this channel, a great way to do that is by purchasing the finished tutorial project files on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. So if you purchase the finished tutorial project files, then you'll get all the resources like the textures and the sound effects and anything you'll need to follow along with the tutorial. And you'll also get the final renders, the finished animation, and the finished Blender file if you want to go into the Blender file and use it as study material and see how I created everything, or even to use the 3D models in your projects. And joining my Patreon page is a great way to help support the channel monthly, because as well as getting access to lots of Blender content, you'll also be helping to support the channel each month. So thank you all so much for your support. So now I'm going to go over all the textures and resources to follow along with the tutorial, and all the textures and resources are going to be completely free, so I'll have all the links in the video description if you want to download them. However, if you purchase the tutorial project files, then you'll get all the resources, so you'll get a folder, a textures folder with all the different textures and the materials and other resources that you'll need. So I'm going to be downloading this Bark 001 from Ambient CG, and I'll be downloading the 2K JPEG version. Then I'm also going to be downloading this Bark 002, and again I'll download the 2K JPEG version, and then also this Bark 012, again I'll download the 2K JPEG version. Then I'm going to be using my procedural Blue Jay egg material, and so that's a tutorial which I recently posted. So if you want to pause this video and go over and watch that tutorial and learn how to create the material, you can create that material and then we'll be adding it into this project. Or if you want to purchase the material, you can also purchase it on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, so links are in the description. Now I'm also going to be downloading this feather texture, and this is from Pixabay. Then I'm also going to be downloading these leaf textures, and I'm going to be downloading the 4K JPEG version of these textures. Then I'm also going to be downloading this HDRI to get some realistic lighting. And for this HDRI, I'll be downloading the 2K version and the HDR version. And then finally, I'll be downloading this nature and birds sound effect from freesound.org. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and I'll have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. So I'm just going to start by deleting everything. And I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to add a new cube for the stick. So we're going to create a bunch of little sticks, and then those sticks will be used to create the bird nest. So let's scale the cube down to a 0.05, just a 0.05, and then press Ctrl A and apply the scale, and I'll hit the period on the numpad to zoom into the cube. So we'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the stick up sideways like this, so it's longer. So let's go to top view, and I'll use Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll put a loop cut there, and I'm going to rotate this loop cut, maybe move it over a little bit, add another loop cut with Ctrl R, click there, and then bring this loop cut up, and I'm just going to shape this to kind of a random twig shape. So I'm going to make it kind of move around a little bit so it's not so straight. So I'm going to also go into wireframe so I can select the back vertices and kind of scale this down, extrude it, scale it down, and rotate it, kind of have it get smaller at the end. And then back here, maybe I'll extrude this out. Actually, I'll scale it up first and then extrude it out so it's a bit bigger. I can also add a loop cut here and maybe drag this down. Also, I can hit Ctrl B to add a bevel, and I can scroll up my mouse wheel to add a few cuts to the bevel. So I'm just going to make it a little bit kind of round and random. So you can see already this stick is getting a little bit kind of randomly shaped. I might also box select some pieces here on the side, maybe bring this down a little bit. Maybe box like this and kind of rotate it up a little bit. All right, something like that. So it just is a bit more of a random shape. Then I'll hit Control 1 to add a subdivision surface with one level and shade the object smooth. And then back in edit mode, I'll hit Control R for some loop cuts, add a loop cut there. And also let's add another loop cut there. And I'm doing that to sharpen up the very end of the twig. Then I'm going to box select the end here and I'll duplicate this and I'm going to rotate it so it's pointed up, and then I'll scale it up on the Z axis so it's a bit longer. Let's scale it down now and I'm just going to stick it right in there. So I'll go back to solid view and I'll just stick it there on the front or kind of the side, kind of the top of the twig, and I'll duplicate it again, double tap the R key to rotate it around, and I'm going to stick it right there and then stick it there inside the twig, just so it has a few little spots kind of popping out of the twig. So I basically want to do this 3 more times. So we're going to create 3 different random twigs. So I'm going to duplicate the object, put it here, and then we can go into edit mode. So for this one, I'm going to hit the L key with my mouse hovered over these little pieces here, and then hit X, and we're going to delete the vertices. I can also go into wireframe, and I will click right here to turn on proportional editing, and then I can hit B for the box select this side, and I can rotate it, move it over, kind of like that. I can also select everything, and then hit Alt S, and Alt S will scale it along the normals, and I can box select this, Alt S, make it a bit smaller and thinner, maybe just like bring this in here. You can also scroll your mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing, so that kind of pulls around the vertices nearby it so it's a little bit more smooth. And then I'm going to box select the end piece here and duplicate it and scale it way down. Let's also turn off proportional editing, and I can scale it down, rotate it, and I'll just have a few more of those little pieces which are coming off the side of the twig. Duplicate this, have another one, maybe rotate it around, double tap R to use the trackball rotation, double tap R, put it there. And then also select the end and just kind of rotate it so it kind of curves over a little bit like that. Press the L key to select that entire piece and I can bring it in. And then I will duplicate this one more time and I'll put another one over here. So I'm going to duplicate this one again. This time I'm going to box select quite a lot of this. So let's box select that there and delete those. Box select that and delete that. So we kind of have a fresh start. And I'm going to make this one maybe a little more thin, and I can box select the end and I can extrude it and scale it, and maybe this one I'll make a little bit more kind of squiggly shaped. So kind of have this go down and then up like that. And then on the other side, I can extrude it, scale it. So really pretty easy modeling, just making a few little twigs. And these again are going to be for the bird nest. Now if I box select this side, I want to hit the F key to fill a face there, and then I'll hit Control R and click, and then drag over and click there to add a loop cut, so that it's a little bit sharper on that side. And I'll do the same thing over for this side. All right, so we have another one, and this one I'll also just add a few little pieces. So I'll just box select the end, duplicate it, rotate it over, scale it way down, and stick another piece right in there, duplicate it again, and maybe have another piece pointed up. So I'm just going to do this one more time because I just want a lot of variation. So there we go. Now I have 4 different kind of random twigs. So now what I also want to do is create 3 little dry pieces of grass. And again, this is going to be used to create the bird nest. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll add a new cube, and I'll scale the cube way down so it's quite a bit smaller and move it over here. Hit Control A and apply the scale. Also, let's save our file. So click on File and Save. And I'll just save this in a folder in my project files as nest, and then just save Blender file. And then just hit Control S as you're working on the project to save it. So for this, let's go into edit mode, and I want to scale it down the Z axis so it's more flat. We'll go to top view, we'll go to wireframe, and I'll box select the vertices there and bring them out. And then I can extrude them, scale them down a little bit. And we're just going to do kind of similar thing, but this is just going to be a bit more flat, because it's going to be kind of like a little dry grass blade. All right, just like that. But I think I want to select everything and squish it down a little bit on the Y-axis, and then scale the entire thing down a little bit like that. Then I'll hit Control 1 to add a subdivision surface with one level and just shade it smooth. And then I can add some loop cuts. So Control R, add a loop cut at the end there, and Control R, add another loop cut at the end there. So now we have a little grass blade. Now let's select everything and move it here into the center of the origin point. So in edit mode, make sure that the origin point is right there in the center. So let's go to top view, and I just want to make 3 of these. So I'll duplicate it, and in edit mode, I can make this one longer, maybe double tap the R key to kind of rotate it around at a random rotation, and maybe just kind of make this one a little bit smaller. We can have maybe like a bigger one and a smaller one. So I'm just selecting the vertices and kind of moving them around. All right, there's the second one. I'll select the first one again and duplicate it, and maybe make this a little bit longer, squish it down a little bit, maybe make the entire thing a bit smaller. So if you scale it down in object mode, make sure you just hit Control A and apply the scale. And then for this one, let's just make it a little bit of a different shape. So maybe move this up there. All right, so there we go. So now we have 3 blades of grass, kind of dry grass blades, and then we have 4 little twigs here. So we'll select all of these and we're going to hit M to move them into a new collection. Let's click new collection. Let's call this Twigs and then click on create. So now you can see in the outliner we have this Twigs collection. Let's select everything and just kind of drag this here into the center of the world for now. So now I want to set up the materials, but we need some decent lighting to see the materials. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode, and I'm going to be using Cycles Render for this tutorial. You could use Eevee. It doesn't look quite as realistic in Eevee, so I'm using Cycles for a more realistic result, but you could use Eevee if you want to. So in the rendered view now, you can see everything's all gray. So let's go here to the world properties, and let's click here on the surface. Let me just drag this up here. So on the surface, we'll click on the yellow dot next to color. We're going to choose environment texture, and then we're going to open up the HDRI. So here is the HDRI, the Whipple Creek Gazebo. I downloaded the 2K HDR version from Polyhaven, so the link is in the video description, and it's also in the project files if you purchase the project files. And I downloaded the 2K version instead of the 1K version just so it's a little bit higher quality. You can see it still is a bit pixelated, but when we add the depth of field and things, you're really not going to see any of the pixels because it'll just be too blurred in the background. But we will be able to see a little bit of it in the background, but it gives a really nice lighting. I really like all the green colors and all the natural look. So it makes it look like you're in a forest. Let's also go to the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down here to the color management, and on the view transform, I'm going to use filmic, and on the look here, I'll set this to very high contrast so things are more contrasted and saturated. So let's first do the first twig material. So I'm going to select this twig, and we're going to click over here to go to the shading workspace, and I'll go into the rendered view. We'll zoom into the twig, and I will click on new to add a new material. And I'm going to call this material Bark 012 because that is the texture that we're going to be using. So what I'm going to do is select the principled shader, and I'm going to use the principled texture setup using the Node Wrangler. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, click on edit and go to the preferences. And over here in the add-ons tab, go to the search and search for node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So with the principled shader selected, you want to hit Control-Shift-T. So in the textures folder, I'm going to go to the Bark 012 that I downloaded. What I'm going to do, these are all the downloads from Ambient CG. What I'm going to do is just select the color and then hold down the control key and select the normal GL and the roughness. So just those 3, and we'll click on Principled Texture Setup. You can see there's the texture. It looks a bit stretched, but we're going to fix that. So you can see the Principled Texture Setup automatically set up all the textures. So the base colors into the base color, the roughness into the roughness, and that's set to non-color instead of sRGB. The normal is going through a normal map into the normal and also set to a non-color. It's also using the UV coordinates. However, instead of it using the UV coordinates, I want to use a cool box projection method. So what I'm going to do is put the object into the vector instead. So we're using the object coordinates. And then what I want to do on each one of these textures is change the flat to box. So it's going to be a projection type flat to box. And then this one here, flat to box, they all need to be the same so that they actually align up on the material. Now, what this does is it kind of just places the textures all around without using UVs, but there's a problem, and that is that there is some seams here. So we can turn up the blend value to get rid of those seams or to make them less visible. So I'm going to turn the blend value to 0.2. So on all these, I'll turn the blend value to 0.2. Now with the box projection method, it's not really doing the best job because the bark is going back and forth this way, but then if I look sideways, the bark is going up and down like this. So an easy way to fix this is to select everything, and we're going to rotate everything. We're going to rotate everything on the y-axis by 90 degrees, and then we'll hit Control A, and we are going to apply the rotation. So now that I've applied the rotation, if you take a look at these, you can see that the bark is going up and down along that object. So all the way around, the bark looks really good. So now that we've applied the rotation, I'm just going to select everything and rotate it back along the y-axis by 90 degrees, but I'm not going to apply the rotation. But now the bark is placed on the twig a lot better. Now this is just going to be a tiny little twig, and so the bark is way too big. This kind of looks like a branch. So I'm going to take the scale values, I'm going to click and then drag down and then drag back and forth, and I'm going to make it a lot smaller. So I'm going to just make this like a 0.04, so the bark is a lot smaller on that little twig there. So now let's do the second twig. So I'm going to select the second twig. Let's click on new, and for this one, I'm going to call this one Bark 002. So bark 002. Let's select the principled shader and hit Control Shift T. And I'll be using the bark 002 texture. So I'll go into the folder. And again, I want to select the base color, hold down the Control key and select the normal GL and the roughness and click on principled texture setup. All right, so there we go. There's the texture. So I want to do the same thing. So I want to change the object. So we'll put the object into the vector instead of using the UV. Drag this over here. And then again, on all these textures, we want to change the flat to box. So I'll do that for all three of them. Flat to box. And then I'll turn the blend to a 0.2. So I'm going to hit Control C with my mouse hovered over the blend, and then just hit Control V and Control V to paste the blend value. So there we go. Now you can see that looks really nice, and because we rotated it up and then applied the rotation, the mapping also looks pretty good. Let's go over to the next one. So we'll select this one here, and you can also change the scale of it if you want to. So I think I'll just turn the scale down a little bit, but that's looking pretty good. So let's go to the next one. We'll add a new material. Now for this one, instead of actually adding a new material, we're going to select the bark 012. But then what I want to do is duplicate this material. So I'm going to click on this little icon here. It looks like two little paper pieces. So I'm going to click on that to duplicate it. And this one, I'll type bark 002 and then just type darker, or whatever you want to call it. You could also just call it twig. I'm going to call it darker. So it's going to be the same material, but it's going to look darker. So for this one, I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to add RGB curves and drop it here after the base color. So what I can do is just drag this value down here by adding a dot and just dragging it down here. And you can see now the bark looks quite a bit darker. Then what I also want to do is add a hue saturation value node. And we're going to drop it after the RGB curves. And then we're going to take the saturation and we're going to turn it up by 2. So it's 1.2. And so now you can see it just looks a little bit darker and a bit more saturated. So that's pretty cool. So we'll now select the last twig and we'll add a new material. And this one we're going to call bark 001. Bark 001. So we'll click on the principled shader and hit Control Shift T. Back in the textures folder, we'll go to the bark 001. We're going to hit the color, hold down the Control key, and also add the normal GL and the roughness, and use principled texture setup. So again, we're going to use the same setup. So we're going to use the object and the vector, drag this over here, and then the flat is going to be box. So we'll do that for all of them, flat to box and flat to box. And then the blend value to 0.2. So just add blend value to 0.2 for all those, so it kind of blurs the edges. All right, so now you can see that bark is a lot lighter. And also here on the mapping, I'll click and drag down and then drag back and forth. You can also hold down the shift key as you're dragging to make your movements more sensitive, and I'll turn down the values, so maybe like a 0.6 or 0.7, so the bark is a bit smaller. And then I do also want to adjust the colors for this a little bit. So for this one, I'm going to go to the add menu and search for RGB curves and drop it here after the base color. And I'm going to click on the B for blue, and I'm going to drag this down a little bit so there's less blue, because I found that when I was making the nest, some of the ones looked a bit too blue. Some of these little pieces will look too blue, so I'm going to drag that down a bit. Then if I click on the R for red, I'm going to pop this up a little bit so it looks a little bit more red. So a little bit more of a brownish color. And then if I click on the C for color, I'll just drag this down a little bit so everything is a bit darker. So now you can see we have a bunch of different variations of our twigs. So now for the grass material, that is going to be completely procedural. So I'm just going to select the grass blade. Let's click on new. I can call this dry grass. And then I'll click on each one of the objects and add the dry grass material to these other objects as well. So I'll be creating a very simple procedural material for this. So I'm just going to search for a noise texture, drop this here. And with the noise texture selected, I'll hit Control T, and I'm going to put the object into the vector to use the object coordinates. So let's preview the noise texture, and I'll change the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 15, and I'll turn the detail to 10. And then what I want to do is put the factor into the base color, and I'll preview the principled shader. Now for the roughness, I'll turn this to like a 0.7. And then what I want to do is adjust the colors, because right now it's just white and black. So what I'm going to do is search for the color ramp and drop this here. And then I can drag these two values together to make it more contrasty. And then I'll change the colors. So I'm going to make the black one kind of like a dark brown. And then this white one, this is going to be kind of like a light brown. And if you want to use the exact same colors I'm using, you can punch in the same hex codes. So for the slightly darker brown, this is the hex code. You can punch that in. And then on the other side, for the slightly lighter brown, here's the hex code if you want to punch this in. This is more of like a yellowish brown because it's supposed to be like a dry blade of grass. Let's also put this into the bump, so I'll put the factor into the normal, and then I'm going to search for a bump node to convert it to bump data, so drop this here, and the factor needs to go into the height value. So let's just zoom in here so you can see it's really bumpy. So let's turn the distance value to a 0.02, so it is a lot more subtle. Alright, so we are now ready to create the nest with geometry nodes. So I'll go back here to the layout and let's go into the solid view, and I'm going to click on the check mark here to hide the twigs. So I'll hit Control S to save. So now I want to add a new object, so I'm going to add a new mesh UV sphere. And I'll scale the UV sphere down to like a 0.2 and then hit Control A, and I'm going to apply the scale. I'll now go into edit mode, and I'm going to go into wireframe, and I'm going to go to front view, and I'm going to box select all the top vertices, and I'll just delete the vertices. So let's click here to turn on proportional editing, and I'm going to box select just the very bottom. I'll hit G and then Z, and then I can scroll my mouse wheel down, and we're just going to flatten it here. Let's also scale it down the Z axis, just to kind of flatten it so the nest is a little bit more flat. Let's also just box select or just select some vertices and just kind of randomly drag it around just to kind of make the shape of it a little bit more random. I do want to keep it mostly a circular shape, but just making it slightly randomly shaped can kind of help to make it look a bit more natural. So we're just modeling the very basic shape of the bird nest, but then we're going to add geometry nodes to it. Let's also select everything in edit mode, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and then I'll hit Alt S. So Alt S is going to scale it along the normals. Now, because we have proportional editing on, it's not going to work, or it's going to pull the vertices along with it. So I have to turn off proportional editing and then hit Alt S, and now we can scale that along the normals. So I'll add like 3 layers. So I'm going to add a layer there. Then I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and then hit Escape, and then hit Alt S to scale it along the normals. So like that. So you can now see we basically have 3 layers there. Then I'm going to hit Control 2 to add a subdivision surface with 2 levels, and I'll use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. So now what I want to do is make it look a bit more bumpy and random. So I'll click on Add Modifier, and I'm going to search for Displace. We're going to add the Displace modifier. Let's click on New to add a new texture. And then I'll click on this button to go to the texturing panel. Now on the image or movie, I'm going to change this to clouds. So you can see it's going to distort it and look kind of noisy. So let's just drag this size around to change the size of the clouds. So I'll change the size to a 0.12. So now if we go back over here to the modifiers, it's coming out way too much. So let's just drag the strength value down, and I'll turn the strength value to like a 0.04. So now you can see it just looks a little bit more bumpy. So now we're ready to add geometry nodes. So I'm going to click here to go to the geometry nodes workspace. Let's zoom into the object, and we're going to add new geometry nodes, and I can just call this bird nest. So this is going to be a pretty easy geometry node setup. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu with Shift A, and I'm going to start to search for distribute. We're going to add distribute points on faces, and we'll drop this in between the input and the output. So this is going to create little points on the faces of the object. And if I turn up the density is going to add more of those points. Now what I want to do is go to the add menu and search for instance. So search for instance on points and drop this after the distribute points on faces. And why we're using this is because we want to put a little twig on each one of those points. Now what I'm going to do is search for the collection info, and we'll drop the collection info here. And on the collection, we're going to choose the twigs. And also make sure in the collection here, make sure that the sphere, which we're adding geometry nodes to, is in the collection. And I'm going to double click on this to rename it and call it nest. And then the twigs just has the twig objects. So now the twigs instance can go into the instance. And so what it's going to do is it's going to put a twig wherever one of these points are. Now there's a bunch of problems with this. They're all pointed in the same direction, and they're also way too big. But let's just drag the collection info down here. Now the other problem is that they're all being placed in the order which they are inside the twigs collection. So they're all being placed in a row. So to fix this, I need to click on separate children, reset children, and pick instance. So now you can see that they're all kind of around the bird nest. If I go into edit mode, there's the bird nest, but they're also way too big. So what I'm going to do is search for the random value. And we'll drop the random value down here, and the value can go into the scale. This way, each stick is going to have a random value between these two values. So I'm going to drag the max down, or click to make the max smaller. And now you can see there's just a few twigs around the bird nest. So on the maximum value, I'm going to go with a 0.08, and on the minimum value, I'm going to go with a 0.05. And then what I can do is I can drag the density up, and I'll make the density quite a lot bigger. For now, let's just go with like 2,000. So there's going to be a lot more of them. Now the problem is that they're all pointed down, and I want them to kind of go around in a circle to make it look like the bird kind of placed them around. So what I want to do is take this rotation here on the distribute points on faces, and this rotation has the data of the rotation of the faces of the object. So I'll put the rotation into the rotation. So now you can see it's kind of working, but now they're all like rotated in. Now why this is happening is because all the twigs were rotating up. So what I want to do is just click on this little check mark here to unhide the twigs, and we applied the rotation with the twigs rotated up. And we did that, if I go into the rendered view, we did that so that the bark material looked correct. However, these twigs are going to be so tiny that you're not really even going to be able to notice that the texture looks a little bit off on the side. So what I'm going to do is just select all the objects, so select all the twig objects and hit Control A and just apply the rotation. So now that I applied the rotation, if I just hide the twigs here, you can now see that all the twigs go around in a circle, and it's starting to look a lot like a bird nest. Let's just open this up to make it bigger again. Now what I also want to do is give it a random rotation. So let's drag the instance on points back here, and what I'm going to do is search for the rotate rotation. So rotate rotation, and we're going to drop this between the distribute points on faces and the instance on points. We can also drag the random value over here and maybe put the collection info up here. So now we have this other rotate by. So what I want to do is search for another random value to rotate it. So we're going to use this random value to give each one a random rotation. So we'll put the value into the rotate by, but this is going to rotate all of the values at once, so on all axes. So I'm going to change the float here to vector, and then the value can go into the rotate by. So this way we have the y-axis and the x-axis and the z-axis to rotate them around by each axis. So let's turn all of these values to 0. So now what I can do, for example, is just rotate this top one here, but the problem with this is that it's rotating it by the global axis, but I want to rotate each individual twig by its local axis. So we're going to change this type here to local. Now I can take this value and rotate it, and you can see each twig is rotating around in a circle. So what I can do here is type TAU for tau. That's a math equation which will generate this value, which will rotate it all the way around randomly, or you could also just turn this up to a giant number like 1,000. So that's just going to rotate the twigs around. And then for these values, you can see that's also going to rotate the twigs around, but I don't want to rotate it too much because it'll get too random. So I'm going to turn these values to a 0.1. So they just look a little bit more random. And then as for the top values, these two values on the top here, we're going to take these and turn them to negative 0.1. So negative 0.1. So they're slightly going in, and then these are going to slightly have them come out. So it just makes it look a little bit more random. And then as for the density here, you can kind of see through the nest a little bit. So you can turn this up slowly. You don't want to turn it up way too high, way too fast, because it might lag your computer. But I'm going to turn the density up to 5,000 because I know that's fine for my computer. Hopefully that isn't too laggy for you, but I'm going to turn it up to 5,000 so that the nest looks pretty dense. So let's just go back here to the layout, and I'll hit Control S to save. Let's go into the rendered view just to see how this is looking. So there we go. There is the bird nest. So just save the project, and that's going to wrap it up for this first part of the tutorial series. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're enjoying the tutorial series. And if you enjoyed these videos and you'd like to help support me and this channel, a great way to do that is by joining my Patreon page. So on my Patreon page, you can join one of my monthly memberships. So you'll be helping to support the channel each month, and you'll get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content. Or you can also get any of the same content on my Gumroad store as a one-time purchase. You can also purchase the finished tutorial project files, and you can go into the Blender file, you can see how I create everything, and you'll also get all the textures and resources and other things that you'll need to follow along with the tutorial. So in the next part, in part 2, we are going to be modeling the leaves and the other branches. So when that part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen, and I'll also have the link in the video description. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.